importance of the Federal Reserve. Today, as you know, the committee decided to vote by a 9-3 vote to maintain the target range for the federal funds rate at 3.5% to 3.75%. The committee is continuing its policy of making ample reserves in the banking system. The economy is showing impressive resilience. Even with recent shocks, the trends are positive and reveal solid growth. Job gains have kept pace with the workforce, and the unemployment rate has changed little. Inflation remains elevated relative to the committee's 2% goal. The committee remains resolute. You've heard this before, but we will deliver price stability. As before, the policy statement conveys just the facts. It's steering clear of forecasting, a choice we consider especially prudent at these uncertain times. Uncertainty, however, does not mean a lack of clarity. For some households, businesses, and market professionals, 5 years of high inflation have left a mistaken impression that's hard to shake, that the Fed's implicit inflation target was somehow above 2%. Let me reiterate, there is no soft inflation target. There is no soft implicit target.
Na, itt vagyok.
Not on this committee's watch. There's only a
Vágjunk
target,
bele.
and it's 2%.
Vágjunk bele.
Not one of my FOMC colleagues is under any illusion. We have begun a new chapter, and we understand that the 5+ years of inflation above target cannot be cured in 9 weeks, or by a single month of modest price decreases. This Fed will not waver. Our credibility rests on performing our duties and delivering on our responsibilities. Americans are right to expect that because our nation's
Így is van. Köszönöm szépen a türelmet mindenkinek. Hallgassuk végig az új Powell-t, ahogy szokták mondani, de én azt mondom, hogy nevezzük a nevén Kevin Walsh-t. Nagyon rövid lesz. Értelemszerűen a kamatok változatlanul maradtak, ahogy azt írtam a posztomban.
The first is a very notable change since our last meeting 42 days ago. Nominal and real yields are materially higher across the Treasury curve. In fact, some of the increases in market interest rates between FOMC meetings are among the most significant in the last 2 decades,
van szó.
ranking around the top decile or so. But if the committee didn't change its policy rate, what happened? In the intermeeting period, market attention centered on real data and real economic developments. Prices reacted in real time to incoming information, and the reduction in forward guidance may have been a factor. Market participants are learning to play the ball, not the referee.
Megint arról beszél, hogy azonnali reakciókat hozott a forward guidance-ra, illetve a különböző
and magnitude they see fit. This is, in my view, a change for the better.
Hogy nem voltak jók ezek az adatok, és most az új Fed jobb adatokat közölt, és azonnali
I understand the desire for rolling forecasts and commentary from this committee. But for our part, we need to observe market reaction to developments, direct and unfiltered. I want to stress, of course, that decisions by this committee matter a great deal. And where necessary and appropriate, we will not hesitate to act. A second economic development is one that I noted at the congressional oversight hearings this month, but it's worth repeating. The most striking feature of the economy is the strong growth of business investment. The surge in high-tech capex has been remarkable, but that does not necessarily make the Fed's role any easier. In the AI-related category of high-tech equipment and software, the most recent data shows 4-quarter growth rates of nearly 20%. This is helping to sustain the healthy momentum of manufacturing output. More generally, CapEx is preparing the ground for future growth. Nonetheless, the precise timing and magnitude of effects on the supply side remain hard to predict. FOMC meetings produce policy decisions. But just as important is candid discussion of the big things that matter most. That too is a priority in this new chapter at the Fed. In our meeting, vigorous discussion centered on four questions, which
hallgassuk végig, aztán mindjárt összefoglaljuk, így van.
We talked a lot about the implications.
Az eddigi mozgások tulajdonképpen egy helyben áll a BTC, amit láttunk, az ugye az olaj egy kisebb mozgást adott le az további eszkalációkkal kapcsolatosan.
Second,
na most ér ki az inflációs elvárásoknak.
Strained supply chains arising from the pandemic, military conflicts, energy supply disruptions, substantial increases in tariff rates, and yes, the surge in AI-related investment. These differ in their sources. Do they also differ in their effects on output and employment? Third, we took up the related question of price increases arising from shocks. The business CapEx boom, for example, is driving up prices of memory and logic chips and associated AI infrastructure. Do these changes indicate a broader inflationary dynamic, or do we just focus on them because they are under the bright streetlight? Finally, we discuss monetary policy tools and strategies for achieving stable prices. If, as the Fed has long held, interest rate policy should be its primary monetary policy instrument, how much accommodation are we getting from the balance sheet? In all of this, our work is advancing at the Fed. We're asking the right questions. And in this consequential time, we know how very much depends on getting the right answers. Of course, you've all arrived with questions of your own, so let's turn to them now.
Let's start with Steve.
Jó, lényeg a lényeg.
Thank you for taking our questions, Mr.
2008 óta ez a legtovább fenntartott kivárása a Fednek, amit valaha láttunk. A 2%-os cél az abszolút továbbra is benne maradt a úgynevezett trajectory-ben, tehát az ő saját céljaikban. Tekintve ezt a mostani állapotot, én azt tudom mondani, hogy azokat igazolja, amiket mi is levezettünk, tehát ugyanazok a kötvényhozamok, a magasan járó kötvényhozamok, a mesterséges intelligencia produktivitás növekedés, illetve a Fed gazdasági kilátások bizonytalanságnak az ellenére viszonylag jó erőben maradt a munkaerő-piac, amit alapvetően a ma reggeli videóban is összefoglaltam. Ugye itt a munkanélküli segélyeket emeltem ki nektek, hogy azok viszonylag alacsonyan maradtak a felvételben.
How are we doing on inflation? How are we doing on employment? We're trying not to interfere with that market signal. That's part of the reason why we've been somewhat spare in our words, why we pulled back from forward guidance. So they're reacting to events, I would say, much more directly over the 42 days since we last met. This is a good thing. As I mentioned in the prepared remarks, we've seen a material tightening, not just in nominal rates, but in real rates too. And we're observing it. We're trying to stay out of that because, you know, many of you might be interested in our reaction function. We're interested in the reaction of financial markets.
I get that, Mr. Chairman, and I guess the follow-up question is, if the markets are talking to you, what do you hear them saying? And if it's real rates are higher, it would suggest that that's where the funds rate ought to go.
Yeah, so...
sorry.
I'm sorry, it's your question. So, interpreting
mit mondanak
markets
a
is an
piacok
imperfect
számára,
business.
hogyha valóban magasabbak
We
a
central
kamatok, mit
bankers like
lát?
market pros can think these things are overdetermined, but let me offer some speculation. First, as we said in the FOMC statement that you got at 2 o'clock, the economy output is solid. CapEx and productivity are strong. Labor market's solid, steady. The bond market, the treasury market, seems to be saying that as well.
Strong.
If I were to try to break down, disaggregate the treasury
a
market signals, I wouldn't be able to do it perfectly. But the bond market's saying many of those same things, and that's why we're seeing a tightening both in nominals and in reals. even while at some level
Bitcoin
we haven't done much in
64.252
days, the
65.100
markets
felé
have done
szeretném
quite a
látni
bit.
menni, hogyha pozitív folytatást szeretnék gondolni. Ez volt egy kérdés.
Claire Jones, Financial Times. You seem to have got the family fight you were after at this
Az elmúlt
meeting.
42 napban nem csináltak annyit,
We saw three
viszont a piac
dissents.
helyettük sokkal jobb.
Could you characterize the arguments that those dissenters put forward, please?
Ez a komment
and tell us
tetszett,
a
úgy
little bit
látom a
why
piacoknak.
you weren't
S&P
persuaded by
7004
them at this stage.
30
Thank you.
So I
egyből.
guess I shouldn't give you their best arguments. I'll give you some others. So you're right. I asked for a good family fight and I got one.
Persuaded.
That's the purpose.
Persuaded.
That's the design feature. I come into this meeting, even this press conference, heartened by what I've experienced the last 2 days. Most of our discussion were on the big questions that matter to the conduct of monetary policy.
Nagyon szűk szavak, nagyon harapó fogóval kell kihúzni belőle mindent, az abszolút így van,
between
igen.
and among my colleagues. It was a real family fight. My view, which you've long heard, is that's the better way to get policy right. That's our North Star. So there was a lot of agreement
Arannyal
that I
kapcsolatban,
heard.
igen, arany is
We have
ugrott
the
egyet,
powers,
de ugyanott
the
vagyunk,
tools,
4100,
also the authority
4030
to deliver
környékén.
stable prices. No walking back from our responsibilities.
Olaj megy most.
There was a large majority support for
megint.
the decision that we made in the room. But I also want to leave you, Claire, with one other impression. There was nothing inertial about that discussion. It was an active, robust discussion about what's in the full range of what we can do and might want to do in the period ahead. You characterized accurately there was a disagreement about a decision today. I would say that doesn't sort of capture the full essence of the discussion. The path to central bank heaven requires delivering on our remit. These days, that means delivering on price stability. I wouldn't measure that path in 42 days or any one particular meeting. And I came out of that meeting even more confident that this is the right team to win the battle against high inflation.
How much do you think not going in July was down to the cool CPI print for June?
So in 2 words, not much. Not much. I'd like to believe that the committee shares my views, which is
Ugye a
the
CPI
historic
pozitívat
problem with data
mutatott.
dependence is
Az
the
előző adatok
data
alapján.
and the dependence. We are not relying on any one individual piece of data as cover or as an excuse or as validation.
Kritizálja megint azt, hogy az infláció
what I care about,
alapvetően
what I think the committee cares
rosszul
about
volt
is
mérve az
trends on the
eddigi
data.
hónapokban,
Sure, we
években,
got some
és hogy
encouraging
most
inflation data.
reméli, hogy a
I think at the meeting
testület
42 days
tagjai
ago I said something like
az
63
ő
months
nézőpontjában
of
értnek
inflation above
egyet.
target.
Magyarul,
I
hogy
didn't say 64,
a
though the
holnapi,
final
éppen pont a
calculation
holnapi
might
PC
be a
adatra vagyok
close
kíváncsi,
one.
hogy vajon
So
ha az jobb
we'll be
lesz,
watching
akkor ez
inflation
pont
data
annak
over the period
köszönhető, ami az
ahead.
ő befolyása.
But I also don't want you to
Magyarul,
leave
hogy
the
a PC
misimpression
adat
that we're sort of
követe az
breathlessly waiting
inflációt,
that.
CPI részét.
I've called for a task
Ugye
force to
PPI és a
revisit
CPI
both the
összesítve jó
private
volt.
and public data we use to make our decision making.
Megint azt
That task force is
súlykolja,
out
hogy
doing
rosszul
their work.
mérték
I'll
az
be checking
inflációt
back in with
eddig.
them the next couple of weeks. But I wouldn't say we
A task
overly
force megint
relied on
előkerült.
any one piece of data, including that data which surprised some a couple of weeks ago.
Ugye, aki nézte az előző streamünket. Igen, Task Force a munkacsoportokra fogja
Neil
megint.
Irwin with Axios. Thank you for taking our questions. So the Fed funds rate is now about 75 basis points below the 2-year yield. Suggests markets think you'll have to tighten eventually, about 100 basis points below most Taylor rule estimates.
Na, arany is
You're hitting
kezd
your
végre
employment mandate,
megindulni.
inflation
Jó.
stays high. Why should rates not be higher today?
There's a lot in there, Neil. So rates are higher today than they were 42 days ago. Markets have made decisions because we step back in part from trying to influence those.
Aztán egy töltött.
Market judgments have moved up on what
Miért nem
nominal rates
emeltek
are
most kamatot? Ez
across
volt a
the
nagy
treasury
kérdés.
curve. That doesn't mean we take them as by dictation, but we're observing them. So I think it's a mischaracterization to say that markets haven't reacted because we didn't move today. Markets are reacting in real time. In the period ahead, we've got important decisions to make about the policy rate. Markets in the intervening period, I think, have quite a bit of decisions to make. I'll see if I can put it this way. Monetary policy matters not just by what we say or even what we do. Monetary policy matters by how it affects the real economy. And these prices that we see in financial markets is one of the many ways in which it affects the real economy. We'll be continuing to watch that market information, see how it responds to incoming events, and that can help inform our decision making when we meet in 7 or 8 weeks.
How would you characterize in the family fight the last couple of days of you and the other 8 members who wanted to hold? Was that a strong conviction, or was that a hair trigger close call on holding versus tightening?
Well, I think the vote was 9-3. The broader discussion to my ear over the course of the last days showed a lot of agreement on the hard questions. The 4 questions I raised at the outset about what's really happening in the economy with the shocks and absent the shocks. What are our tools and our capabilities? What's the effect on prices on output? I heard a lot of commonality on the questions. Were there different leans on the answers?
Szeretném hallani egyébként, hogy mit terveznek a következő hónapokra a kamatokkal kapcsolatosan.
But my own
Erre várom a
judgment
kérdést, a rákérdezést.
this is a period of watchful thinking, not watchful waiting. And I think the score on that vote was unanimous.
Úgy érzem, hogy proaktív a Fed. Nem ez a
New York Times. You've mentioned that looking at the
sodródó,
Fed's
hanem
policy tools is
mint a
one
szeretnék
element of
a
a three-pronged strategy
folyamatokat
to address
sokkal
the
jobban
inflation problem.
befolyásolni az új mérésekkel, az új technológiákkal, amit
those
beépítenek.
tools. If inflation is too high and not coming down, is the best remedy to raise interest rates?
So that was the discussion in the last 2 days.
Hogyha magas az infláció, akkor az
Is
a
that
legegyszerűbb, hogy
the
emelik a
dominant
kamatokat?
remedy?
Kérdés.
If
mit mond erre
inflation
Pavel úr?
continues to be elevated through the forecast period, interest rates could well be part of that solution. But I wouldn't say it's in isolation.
Még nem hallottam
I tried
semmi
to
olyat, ami miatt azt
describe in
mondanám,
my
hogy
remarks today the point that I made into the oversight committees a couple of weeks
straight
ago.
up
I think there
elindulhatnánk.
was a misimpression by some in financial markets, by some households and businesses, that central bankers like me, we set a 2% inflation target, but maybe we were more tolerable of a somewhat higher inflation target. In economics, we'd call that the revealed preference. And so might it have been rational for people to think, well, their inflation target's somewhat higher. What I heard in the last 2 days, what I've heard in 8.5 weeks is no. We will deliver the 2% inflation target. That is the committee's definition of price stability. So one way, absent the tools
Hozni
that you
fogják a
reference, to
2%-ot.
ensure that we get there, is ensure that expectations are centered around the
Kamatpolitika,
right number.
az ami lesz. Tehát
And I think we've
a
made some
célt el
progress
fogják
on
érni,
that.
ezt
I am not
mondta.
suggesting we're done on that. It's worth reiterating. And ultimately, the business we're in, Colby, is performance. We are going to be judged by how we perform. And that's what we intend to do. The inflation target, making clear expectations is one part of it. Making sure we demonstrate we're responsible for it, we're not blaming as another. And our policy tools, like you referenced, is the third and equally consequential part.
How are you factoring the fact that a large portion of the inflation overshoot is being caused by supply shocks, as it's mentioned again in the statement? Does that blunt the effectiveness of rate hikes in your view?
First, on the premise of your question, it was almost as if you were listening to our discussion in the last day and a half.
Igen, tehát, hogy a
A lot of our focus
kamatemelések,
was on
hogy a
trying to
infláció visszatér,
understand
nem
and
invalidálja azt, hogy a
identify
kamatemelések
underlying
szükségesek?
inflation dynamics amid shocks.
Típusú kérdés.
We take these shocks seriously. There have been a series of them that have been hitting this economy. We're not looking through them and saying, oh, they don't matter. What we're trying to understand is to what extent are these shocks
Dixie kicsit
broadening their
ereszkedik, igen,
effects,
ezt jól
broadening
látom
in
én
their
is.
impact on prices that are quite far removed from it. Our goal is to have growth that is broadening and inflation that is becoming more limited, more circumscribed. I'll be the first to admit the shocks make this job and this policy conjuncture a little tougher, but that's among the chief questions we've asked ourselves. And around the room, people have different views on it. I tend to think
Arany
in the coming
4100
months we're going to
környékén
refine that
próbálkozik.
view and have a better judgment. And we're going to have market prices trying to help inform it too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Edward Lawrence from Fox Business. I guess I want to drill down maybe a little bit. What specifically, in your mind, would be the argument then for a pause today?
So I wouldn't characterize what we did as anything like a pause. I would characterize what we did as a rigorous review of the economic situation. I would characterize what we did as a review of the big hard
Bejött egy német
questions,
kommentelő.
and I'd characterize
Außer
it
nachher
as
noch
a
ein Video
view
für den
of what
Dachraum
our
aus.
own
Nein, Bro,
homework
heute
is
nicht.
to try to resolve those
Definitiv
questions in the
nicht.
period ahead. If you were to
Geht sich
try
nicht
to
aus,
force a
zeitlich.
description that this was a
Nem nagyon
pause,
mozgatja meg a
I would
piacot
say
Jerome,
financial market
Jerome
prices would take the other side
jobban
of that.
teljesített
Financial
néha.
market prices
Ja,
in
igen.
this intermeeting period.
Én úgy gondolom, hogy a piac
reacted
mozgását
to the inflation
holnap
data in
látjuk
one
jobban,
direction,
tehát ilyen
strong economic growth in
PC
the other
adatnál,
direction,
vagy ha
and,
ebben az
nominal
időszakban,
real
vagy
rates went
hátralevő
up.
20
Did
percben,
the
amit szerintem még
Fed
fog
take an
beszélni, mond
explicit
valami
change in
olyasmit.
its policy
A
rate
szeptemberi
today?
kamatemelésekkel
But I
kapcsolatban
think that's the
szeretnék
beginning
hallani
of the
valamit.
story, not the end of the story.
And if I could, I did want to ask, not forward guidance, but looking forward. Traditionally, a Federal Reserve chairman uses the Jackson Hole summit as a sort of a reset of monetary policy. Well, how do you look
Forward
at the speech
guidance.
that you're
Na
going
most
to make
jövünk ide.
tomorrow?
I look at it like a blank piece of paper right now. I have not
Augusztusi beszédre.
begun consideration with the incredible team here what would go into that document. I think you've characterized it correctly. Historically, at least from my first tour of duty at the Fed to more recent periods, it would be sort of a setting up speech more often than not of what was going to be happening in the fall. I haven't made any judgments on that, but those are judgments we'll have
Igen,
to
az
come
arany,
to.
ahogy megy.
If I could, in the
Ugye
high mountain
BTC is.
air in Jackson, Wyoming, I'd like to also frame the big questions.
70% eddig az esélye annak,
especially
hogy
with
a
the
kamat emelés
proliferation of
szeptemberre
meetings and press conferences,
megtörténik. Kíváncsi
to get
vagyok, hogy
caught
ezután a
up in
beszédben
the
mi lesz.
myopic. Did you do this by
Ha
a
esik,
quarter, do
az
that?
esélye az bikás értelemszerűen.
Ultimately, whether we deliver on price stability matters some, the decisions we make in 6 or 7 or 8 week periods. But they matter more, what are the big questions? What's really happening with productivity? What's really happening with demographics? What's really happening to the global economy amid the shocks? Haven't made a decision whether it's going to be a big picture speech or whether it's going to be a more traditional setup for all the action we're going to have between September and December. I will tell you one other thing that I am doing between now and Jackson Hole, which is I'm checking with those task forces. My first principle of establishing a task force is find the best subject matter experts anywhere in the world and put them together, especially put them together with other people who might disagree with them. In the next couple weeks, I'm going to be doing a check back in. I've given them time to sort of think hard about their agenda, their debate, their schedule, and when they might be ready for prime time. I'll be doing a little bit of that checking, and that may or may not inform anything I have to say in Jackson.
Nick Temeros of the Wall Street Journal. Chairman Warsh, I want to follow up on Colby's question about policy transmission. You've said there's no cruel choice between stable prices and full employment.
S&P
Rates bring inflation
erős,
down
igen,
by cooling
abszolút.
demand. It's generally thought that can show up in the labor market. If that's not the channel you're relying on, what is?
Yeah, so let me go back to first principles, Nick.
Eddig tetszik a piacnak az, amit
I
lát
don't
és hall.
believe that
abszolút így van.
either part of our mandate is generally at war with the other part. I do not believe that price stability and full employment is an either-or proposition. There have been policymakers over the last several generations who have thought that there is a strict trade-off there. That isn't my judgment. In fact, my judgment is if and when we deliver on our remit, we're going to be satisfying both prongs. We're going to have price stability and full employment. And in fact, if you want to do the most harm to the labor markets, you would run a period of high inflation that's variable such that employers, businesses, wouldn't really know what's going on. So I think the two parts of our mandate are equally important. We have no legislative orphans here. I've been talking mostly about price stability because we're doing pretty well collectively as a country, as policymakers on the full employment side. But we're doing considerably less well on prices. That's why we describe them as elevated, and that's what's taken most of our discussion. In terms of transmission mechanisms of monetary policy, I think
Na,
different
tehát, hogy az
tools
árak emelkednek, de a
work
munkaerőpiac
through
stabil,
different transmission
ez nem
mechanisms.
tetszik neki.
Interest rates work through lending channels and credit channels,
Ezen
maybe
dolgozniuk
confidence
kell,
channels and foreign
ezt próbáljuk
exchange.
most kitalálni, hogy
The
ez
balance sheet
tetszik-e
probably works through some other channels like signaling and portfolio
a
balance. We're
piacnak.
keeping full abreast of all these tools in making policy. But if the suggestion is somehow we're going to be fine-tuning aggregate demand so it catches supply, that's not my mental model. I don't think we're great in the fine-tuning business. We're trying to get supply and demand in broad order, but really what we're doing as we sit here today at this press conference is I think we've got a reasonable sense of what aggregate demand looks like in this economy.
Amit látok,
We're
hogy
inferring
esett a
aggregate supply.
valószínűsége a
We're making a
következő,
judgment about what productivity is. And in some
tehát a
sense, there's
következő
a race between
kamatdöntés
supply and demand.
valószínűsége
And the
70%-kal
surge in
beesett
business capex and around
62
AI,
rendig.
it's making that calculation a little harder to
És-
judge, but in the period ahead, we're going to be trying to judge just that.
And if I could ask, where exactly was the disagreement today? Was it about the inflation forecast, or was it something more around the risks, the tactics?
Yeah, so I'm going to I'll let the dissenters speak for themselves. The way I heard it over the last 2 days was overwhelming agreement on objectives and authority and commitment. I didn't hear anybody walking away from it. The judgments as to how best to achieve the price stability, that was probably the question that we were trying to answer. What's the best move? What's the best strategy? What's the best way to achieve it? And a second question that was asked is, when do we need to make those harder calls? When do we need to make those decisions? And like I said to one
Igen,
of
én
your
is hallgatom.
colleagues, I was
Érdekes, hogy hallod a
comforted that
füledben,
markets in the intermeeting
amit mond,
period
és
weren't
közben
reacting
fogom
to
olvasni a
us, weren't
kommenteket.
reacting to dots or to speeches. They appeared more than ever to be
Kérdések,
reacting to
amikkel én
real-time
idejöttem,
events.
hogy
So they're
következő
gauging
hónap,
themselves
tehát
the,
augusztusban nem
how
lesz nyilván kamat
restrictive
döntés,
the treasury curve should be.
sajtótájékoztató,
And that I think has been
de
a
szeptemberben és a
useful
szeptemberi
development. We don't
valószínűségek
endorse any
csökkentek
particular market
eddig.
move,
80%-ról
but I'd also
70-re,
suggest we
majd
observe them with
62-re,
keen interest.
ami alapvetően támogatja a visszapattanást mostani helyzetben az S&P-n, illetve akár a
Janelle Marte with
Bitcoinon is,
Bloomberg.
az aranyon is. Tehát
Following
az
up on
arany
that,
tézisünk, a
was
Bitcoin
more
tézisünk
uncertainty
úgy
in the
tűnik
markets about
eddig,
what the Fed
hogy
would do at this
igazolt,
meeting.
de bármi
To
lehet
some
még.
extent you might think
Holnapon a
that's what you
PC
wanna
adat,
see, but my
ami ha
question is
kijön
about, is there
rosszabbul,
a
mint
point
az
at which you
elvártak.
would not want to surprise the markets if they
Fékezheti
were
ezt a
pricing in
visszapattanást,
something with higher
és a
certainty that was opposite of what you
hátralévő
were
részében ennek
intending
az
to do?
FOMC
What are
gyűlésnek
the risks
lesz
that you see
valamilyen,
associated with
vagy
that?
sajtótájékoztatnak valamilyen
So
mondat,
it's a
az
good
is
question.
fékezhet
Surprise
egyébként.
is not the objective function. Surprise is not what we're solving for. We have a clear North Star. What we're solving for is how to make the best decisions. Almost everything else should be in service to that goal. By not spoon-feeding markets, by not previewing our decisions, by not sort of giving nudges and leans, my colleagues and I have found in the intermeeting period, what we're getting is the views from a very accomplished economist. That's the internals of financial markets. Instead of just repeating or echoing what we're saying back to us, they're giving us somewhat, not perfect, their own judgment. Surprises are not the objective, but at the same time, I would say we didn't come into this meeting feeling constrained by the full range of alternatives we had in front of us.
So some
Szerintem
of your
mindjárt
peers
egy
have
perc, és
continued
így
to discuss how they
olyan
think
gyorsan le
about
fogja
policy
vágni.
decisions, and if you don't offer your reaction function or your way of thinking about it, how concerned are you that you're ceding control of the narrative?
So not very concerned. That's a short answer to the question. When some people that follow the Fed say, well, we don't want your forecast. We don't want your dot. We just want your reaction function. Part of me hears what we really want is your forecast. What we really want is your dot. In terms of reaction function, let me sort of disabuse people of a question that may or may not be real and be out there. Any central banker, especially a central banker where the labor markets are more or less at equilibrium. Any central banker, when he or she sees underlying inflation moving higher, he or she is more inclined to tighten policy. Again, when you've achieved the other side of your mandate and you see underlying inflation falling, he's more inclined to loosen policy. That's my reaction function, and I don't suspect it will cause people to not continue to pry for more, because the truth is, for a very long time in a lot of countries, coming out of the 2008 crisis, where in crisis mode, we were purposefully providing a lot of information, trying to provide a lot of assurance, trying to tell people exactly what we're going to do, offering forward guidance with clarity as if we're tying our own hands behind our back. Well, in crisis mode, that strikes me as a very prudent policy. But in more benign conditions, it strikes me as worth revisiting. But markets and market participants and reporters have learned to devour all that information, so I take seriously that the pullback of forward guidance requires some transition. Reform isn't easy, but our general judgment is going to help us make better decisions, and in so doing, satisfy our remit.
Paul Weissman. There's a mic coming.
Thank you. When you talk about the 2% inflation target, what measure are you relying on?
Yeah, so I'll give two answers. First, let me give the proper standard answer. The Federal Reserve every January outlines a statement of purposes and strategy. And in that strategy document, which I believe was dated January of this year, it describes a measure of PCE inflation as the objective function there. I have enough of my own, so that's our number, we're sticking with it. Who knows, come after next January, what we might say about strategy. I suspect the task forces might have something to add. But I'll say this, some version of the Lucas critique, some version of Goodhart's law in economics should remind us that when we talk about measures of inflation or something else, and we describe those measures as being consistent with our objectives, we might make them such that they're not very good measures or very good objectives. Broadly, if you said to me standing in front of you, I abide fully by the strategy document, we're going to deliver 2% inflation and not a whisper more. But to achieve that, I'm looking at a broader set of inflation data than PCE. So without sort of fully revealing my cards, I'm trying to understand, like my colleagues, what's the underlying generalized change in prices that are happening in the economy. It is not a perfect science. I might have said 42 days ago, I've got a task force for that. But we have a data project that's trying to look and see whether we can't separate the noise from the signal. And so if you would hear a message from me, yes, I care about what the PCE prints are. I care about what the contributions are from CPI and everything else. But my lens is broader than that.
De hogy igen, alapvetően alkalmazza a hagyományos inflációmérő eszközöket, mint CPI, PPI és a PCE adat.
Michael McKee from Bloomberg Radio and Television. I'm struggling a little bit with some of what you've said today, and maybe you can help clarify this. You've said over and over again that your job is to bring down prices, to get prices stable, to hit your target, and that you will hit your target. The market says you're not there yet because they've raised rates, but all you've talked about today is talking about it, and it's not like members of the committee weren't there before you talking about it. So I guess what the American people might be asking is, what are you waiting for?
Yeah. So, believe it or not, this press conference is not all I've done today. We have spent an inordinate amount of time in the last 2 days, 2 weeks, looking at our monetary policy strategy, evaluating our tools,
közben a következő FED meeting valószínűségek.
The sources of data that we
Látjuk
have at our
azt, hogy
disposal and we
a
wish we
valószínűségek
had.
változnak
We've also thought hard
szeptemberre, ez
about the
érdekes.
period ahead. What among
Ami
these
a
questions
számunkra
will
pozitív
be
irányba
answered
egyébként.
with more clarity, certainly not certainty. So the decision we made today, the discussion we had in that room, was the farthest thing from inertia I can imagine. As a point estimate at this very moment, in a choice between two alternatives, you heard the results of it, but I would tell you that this discussion was far more robust, and our thinking about how best to achieve that target is advanced, and over the coming months I expect it to be advanced much more significantly. If I were to steal a follow-up question, I won't let you won't be giving it up. If I were to steal a follow-up question,
what's
the world think about what you've done? I would again reiterate, what we do isn't just about what we say.
Nézd, itt belekötöttek azért most Walsh-ba elég erősen, ez egy olyan kérdés, hogy szeretnék elérni a célinflációt 2%-on, hogy eddig csak beszéltek róla, de hogy mit tettek érte. Elég csípős kérdés volt, és most ugye ezt magyarázza.
I think what they're broadly saying is that this committee does own it, has the credibility to deliver it, and they believe, like I do, that we will. But I don't want to leave you with a misimpression. We've got no magic wand. This isn't something that we're going to be able to carry out in days or weeks, but we're going to deliver on the responsibility that Congress gave us. And today's meeting and the preparation for today's meeting was an important step towards that destination.
I'd like to follow up on the task forces as well and ask what vetting did you do of the people that you appointed to the task forces? In particular, given Mark Andreessen's substantial political spending, $25 million in just the past year to back candidates who oppose stricter AI regulation, how can the public be confident that a committee he co-chairs will provide an independent assessment of AI's economic effects rather than one aligned with the interests of the AI industry?
Yeah, so I selected 15 incredible subject matter experts to tackle 5 of the most important questions that if we get the answers right, we're going to do a far better job in delivering. And if we get the answers wrong, we have a problem. The comfort that I can give you and your listeners is we're the decision makers. The chairman of the board of the Federal Reserve and the members of the board and the FOMC, we will be the consumers of the outputs from 5 different committees. The judgments we're making will be informed by, but not at all determined by, these outside groups. My theory of the case in establishing the task forces were to pick people with extraordinary talent, depth of expertise, and a divergence of views inside every committee, so they too can have a family fight. This is not outsourcing to people that aren't known and haven't been vetted. This is seeing whether new ideas can catalyze a broader, better, more informed discussion inside the room. And I'm very confident that we're able to do that. I am impressed by the credentials of these 15 people. And full disclosure, I've known almost all of them for a very long time. And I think they're going to give their best views on the subject.
Még nem tudunk semmi jóról beszélni. Aranynál 4025, 4250, az ezüstnél $60 fölött. Igen, a rész egy jó döntés volt, látjuk, hogy ezért 2026-ban szépen jött föl.
So I need a little help here too. You've said repeatedly you have no tolerance for inflation, and yet we are seeing above target inflation repeatedly for 5 years and through your term so far. And sure, you have no magic wand, but you have not taken action. You just gave us a little peek at your reaction function as well. You said that if underlying inflation is rising, that you would tend
most megint kritizálják, hogy az inflációt nem tudja legyőzni a FED, és hogy ezt ígérték, de eddig nem tudták 5 év alatt megcsinálni.
Mindig cél fölött van az infláció. So could you explain what you mean by no tolerance for inflation?
Hogy a jegybanknak ezt egyébként kezelni kéne tudnia, hogy az inflációt megállítsák. És 2008 óta ezt mondta. 2008 óta.
Deliver it already.
Ez picit egy ilyen érdekesség.
This is not an excuse, this is a fact. This FOMC, this board has been in business for 8.5 weeks. the patience, the impatience that households and businesses feel have been going on for 63 months. We are on the job. We will deliver. We are focused like a laser on making sure we can do it. But the suggestion that we're going to be able to do it with our magic wand is one I want to disabuse you and everyone else of. But the discussion in the last 2 days give me more confidence
Hát
even than I
szerintem
had
még
8.5
az
weeks
korai
ago.
kijelenteni,
This
hogy
team that we
visszaadják
have
az
at the
emelkedést.
FOMC,
Tehát 4000
the support that we have from board staff, and the new hard questions we're
370-ről
asking. We need to
7480-ig,
resolve those,
de
and as
látjátok,
we
hogy 4 órás
resolve those
ellenállásig még nem
questions,
tudtuk
get smarter
visszaszerezni.
on those, we're going to deliver on the remit. You don't have to take my word for it. If you look broadly at market prices, they are certainly not saying all clear, but they are working in concert to keep us on our toes, and they have tightened financial conditions in this intra-meeting period, and that has given us, that has provided us some comfort that we've got the ability and capability to deliver.
Értem. Aha, oké.
And is your read or your, I guess,
Jó,
faith
59-60% következő
markets ability to sort of
kamat
make a judgment and then
döntésnek
you
a
to take signal from that
százaléka,
judgment.
tehát a kamatemelést.
How does that affect you when you come up on the September meeting and markets are seeing a near 100% chance of a rate hike as they see now? How does that feed into your decision making and your thinking?
So we're not going to be constrained by market prices. We're not going to be constrained or take verbatim from what the market's doing. But I think it's useful and to understand that markets can be a very good source of information. Not a determinative source, not a perfect source, but if we're trying to land the plane and deliver 2% inflation, and we take a very useful source of information and we get it all fogged up by giving it our own forecasts, by providing rolling commentary, I can assure you that we're going to have less information, less ability to land the plane successfully and deliver price stability. We're just trying to make sure that that source of information is as direct and unfiltered as possible. It isn't to the exclusion of data sources and opinions and other surveys, but if you're hearing from me, we wanted to make sure we were getting a better source of information. I think in a relatively short time we are.
We'll go to Brian Chung for the last question.
Hi there, Chairman Warsh. Brian Chung with NBC News.
Utolsó kérdéshez
You
érkeztem.
said you'd be open to having press conferences when there's news to make. So today, no change to rates, no forward guidance. For the average household, I guess, what was the news today?
So apparently it was news that I had a press conference. Let me just see if I can offer some clarity on that. Between now and year end, my predecessors and the Federal Reserve committed to press conferences this year. I'm committing to press conferences this year. That might be news to the people in this room and of no particular interest to your viewers and your readers back at home. What I can offer as assurance is that the Fed's on the case, that this Fed chairman feels better about this board and this committee's ability to deliver than I did when I showed up here on the first day, and I showed up pretty confident. I've been heartened by the reception that I received. No doubt in some of your commentaries today, you'll talk about a divided Federal Reserve.
Csak 40,
That's not the
tehát hogy
feeling I
pár
felt the last
május
couple of days
óta
and the couple days before it. What
van
I felt
a
was
Fed
a
elnökként
group of
jelen, és hogy
professionals, all with different perspectives, different views, different
tehát
judgments,
eddig, amit tudtak csinálni,
but
az
eager
a
to roll up
maximum
their
volt,
sleeves and have a family
de
fight.
úgy gondolja,
And
hogy a
eager
következő
to
hónapokban az eredményei
reform
még
the way in which the
pozitívak
Fed does
lesznek.
policy. A
Erre vagyok
keenness and
kíváncsi,
open-mindedness
hogy
and
ezt hogyan fogja
curiosity
a piac
about that.
felfogni. Ez
So
egyébként
we have a
pozitív
far
hír.
better chance to deliver on the remit that Congress gave us.
Lássuk a
And so I want to
százalékokat.
leave you with the optimism of a new central banker that we're committed as ever to deliver and to offer an assurance we will. Thank you all very much.
kicsit olyan, hogy sokat mondott, kevés információval, jól lavírozott a kérdések között. Én úgy gondolom, hogy pozitív üzenetet akart mutatni. Én azt gondolom, hogy ez azzal, hogy a kamatok együtt maradtak, és az, hogy a valószínűsége esik vissza a szeptemberi kamatemelés lehetőségének 80%-ról 60-ra, ez pozitívként fogható föl. Én úgy látom, hogy a holnapi PC biztos rá fog segíteni, vagy ellene fog menni annak, amit láttunk, vagy kaptunk. Tekintsük meg azt, hogy milyen a BTC-ben, nézzük meg a 7-es szinten, nézzük át az Ethereumot. Aztán én azt gondolom, hogy elköszönök, mert semmi olyan új dolog nem történt, amiről ne beszéltünk volna. Tehát a ma reggel kiposztolt videóban pontosan arról beszéltünk, hogy a kamatok valószínűleg így fognak maradni. Miért? Mert a munkanélküli kérelmek felvétele viszonylag pozitívan jött ki, illetve a hosszú lehető kötvényhozamoknak a szintje miatt nem tud most egyszerűen csak úgy emelni, és ennek köszönhetően, amit kaptunk, szimplán azt hozta, amit elvártunk. Tehát a piac ezt már beáraszta, én úgy látom, hogy a BTC számára itt csak a klasszikus lefutás fog maradni. Maradunk ebben a range-ben, esetleg a holnapi nap, hogyha pozitív a PC dob, akkor az enyhíteti a CME Groupon elolvasható, tehát ezt itt tudjátok nézni, a CME Groupon olvasható valószínűségeket szeptemberre. A háború lehet az egyetlen olyan dolog még, ami az olajnak köszönhetően, mivel az energia szektorra fogták az infláció veszélyeket, hogyha az olaj tovább emelkedik, az sajnos leütheti az elvárásokat, és úgy a kamatpolitikát is befolyásolhatja. Tehát ezt nézném a következő időszakban továbbra is az olajárat, és holnap pedig találkozunk 14 óra 30 perckor a PC-nél. Ma este úgy gondolom, hogy ezekkel az információkkal inkább egy helyben fogunk maradni valahol itt, ebben a range-ben 62,5 ezer, illetve a 67-68 ezeres sáv környékén. Semmi újat tényleg nem tudok sajnos elmondani, mint eddig. Ennyi. Jó? Tehát ez a tervezet marad nyitva, és azok, amiket az elemzéseimben hoztam nektek. Én ezt a beszédet inkább egy kicsit bikásként tudnám felfogni, hogyha őszinte akarok lenni. Igen, picit inkább bikás vonalba. Jó, holnap folytatjuk. Remélem mindenkinek tetszett ez a rövid bejelentkezés, stream. Amennyiben igen, hagyjatok itt egy lájkot, iratkozzatok fel. Holnap találkozunk. Írásbeli összefoglalók érkeznek, és én is picit átgondolom azt, hogy amit hallottam, azt hogyan lehetne tudományosabban jobban értelmezni. Köszönöm, sziasztok!